took a walk through this beautiful world. Felt the cool rain on my shoulder. Found something good in this beautiful world. I felt the rain getting colder.
Hello and welcome to Chatz in a Pickle, the preeminent podcast where we cover non-struck work with a focus on comedy and criticism. I am Alan Ibrahim, and I'm joined by my head chef, John Fluke. Welcome to the show.
We chef.
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 There's a part at the end where, in the book that we're going to be discussing, where he says like tips if you for some reason want to be a chef after reading this book. And he's like, number one, learn Spanish. You are going to need to know Spanish. It's a useful skill when you're becoming a chef. How are you? What's going on? Like, what's your life like right now? Just, like, talk to me.
I'm feeling good. I've been playing lots of Baldur's Gate 3 that, we talked about a couple weeks ago. It's a great game. It's a really good game. I hit 20 hours on my main character, and kind of like, well, I could go to Act 2, or I could start like two other characters who have different ways of viewing and interacting with the world, and it's been pretty fun to do that. And the school year's begun, and it's going well, so things are solid. What about you? How are you doing?
Things are plasma, bro. Do me a plasma. You know how people used to say that? Like, instead of do me a solid.
By people, do you mean like us?
Yeah, I do mean us. It's like when I tell Magellan off pod, I'm like, oh, people are going to be so mad about this thing on the podcast. And you're like, by people, do you mean the voices inside of your head that tell you that you're not good enough? And I'm like, yeah, they're mean and they're always annoyed at everything we do. Yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm going to a rave this Saturday. Isn't that weird?
Oh, you know where I'm going? I'm going to a Ren fair this Saturday.
We're living two sides of the same life.
Pretty much. I mean, what's the tangible difference between a rave and a Ren fair, really?
Oh, that's poetic.
I mean, you're going to get a turkey leg at both, right?
Oh, yeah, I mean, if you know what I mean. Well, here's Google search what to do at a rave. Number one, they dance. You can dance at a Ren fair. Number two, enjoy the music and the performance. Ren fair.
Yep.
Number three, stick with your friends.
Yes, you better. Otherwise, you're going to make some new ones.
Number four, make some new ones.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you could do that too.
Number five, they move around the different rooms.
They move around the different rooms. Yeah, you do that in a sense. You go between the blacksmith and the haberdashery and the jousting arena.
And the instruments guy.
Yeah, and where all the tigers are or whatever.
Number six, partake in a glow performance. This is not going to be that kind. It's an anime rave. It's an anime themed rave.
Oh, I mean, the fire eating shows are kind of a glow performance.
Oh, that's true. Okay. I remember the globe. I remember the fire eating. Get high. You could totally go to Ren Fair and get high.
I'm sure many do. I choose to get high on life and fiction, the fiction of it all.
Yeah, enjoy the vibe. I think I'll be doing the same. So we are truly doing the same thing in two different ways. Yeah. But I'm looking forward to that. I have some fun stuff going on this weekend besides that I can't talk about on the podcast.
Oh. I had two different segues. That is fun. I had two different segues come into my mind.
Don't tell me one of them was doing drugs.
No. Well, okay. I mean, but no. One of them was when you were talking about the voices in your head, and I was going to be like, well, I had a voice in my head this week that was actually rather pleasant. Segue number one. Segue number two. This is like the Baldur's Gate dialogue options, and this one's only available to you if you're a cleric or something. Was you said we're doing the same thing in two different ways, and I was going to say, well, they're was another thing we did the same 2 different ways this week.
We consumed a pickle. Oh,
We
did you
did.
get any pickles this week? People ask to mention we have to have a pickle update real quick.
I think I had like a spear, like a piece of a spear with a sandwich or something like that.
Why am I not running into pickles in my day-to-day life? Oh, I have one. Sorry, go ahead. Finish yours.
When you were here, I think this was before our last recording, but when you were here visiting and we went to that diner, I got a BLT that came with a pickle, I think.
Okay.
I think that was the last pickle I had.
So I didn't have a pickle this past week, but last Friday we had a going away party at a like mini golf / bar situation.
Oh, that sounds like a nice situation.
Yeah, Boston's really big on like it's a really low impact sport, but you're allowed to drink. Golf plus drinking, mini golf plus drinking, ping pong plus drinking. These are all huge. And they had these margaritas that had a frozen jalapeno in your margarita. So like instead of ice, you just had a frozen jalapeno pepper. And it reminded me of a pickle. That's the closest thing I got.
That's cool.
Yeah,
margaritas, by the way, R.I.P. Jimmy Buffett.
R.I.P. Jimmy Buffett. He's floating away in Margaritaville, and I'm happy for him. I'll never forget the last time we were in Times Square together, and we walked by, and we were like, "Is that a fucking Margaritaville in Times Square?"
Yeah. Also, R.I.P. to fuck. I thought I could find this guy.
Steve Harwell.
Steve Harwell, Smash Mouth guy,
lead singer of Smash Mouth. Honestly, seemed like a really cool dude, very like progressive dude, great singer, made a lot of people happy. Sad to hear it, died very young. We're gonna talk about, I'm gonna be honest with you guys.
Yeah, a third segue option. Here it is.
We have to talk about death this week. It's just gonna come up. So if that's something that makes you all sensitive, I encourage you to turn the podcast off because it's gonna be coming up because we are talking about one of my favorite human beings to live at the same time as us. It's Anthony Bourdain, and specifically his seminal autobiographical novel, Kitchen Confidential, which we both read for my pickle this week. So to set things up, if you're not familiar, Anthony Bourdain was an American chef, author, documentarian, who did a bunch of television in the later half of his life. And in the first half of his life, he was a chef. You know, he was a self-identified sensualist. He grew up with like foodie parents and developed a taste for food and learned how to cook at a young age and got involved with a lot of drugs while early on in his cooking career. And from there jumped between a lot of high intensity kitchens around New York City primarily. And again, in the back half of his life, he got into doing that, but across the entire world and learning about and exploring food and culture and life in a way that left a mark on millions and millions of people. You know, his face is very recognizable. In the 2000s, he was that like he created he was the persona of the bad boy chef, I'd say, mainly because of this book. And he's gone on to inspire a million, you know, chefs, YouTubers, television creators, writers. His unique voice and style and cadence is unforgettable. And he unfortunately died in 2018. He committed suicide at the age of 61 in France. And as I said, left a mark, you know, and we haven't forgotten to this day. I still think about his words and his coverage of different cultures all the time. I picked this pickle because I've been wanting to finish the book for a while, Kitchen Confidential. I've picked at it for years. It's a book that you can definitely kind of like nibble at, which we'll discuss. But it is also seminal in terms of like food writing. And so I wanted to finish it and get a sense for like, where does this whole story go? What is he trying to communicate? Because I didn't realize until this most recent read that the book came out in 2000. I always seem to assume that it came out in the 2010s because it got a second printing when he died. And that's when I read it, was 2018 initially. so I was like reading it and realizing how much cooking culture has changed since the 2000s. And I think from what I've read, not to ever make assumptions about why somebody does the things that they do in life, it seems like that was where a lot of his like depression and anxiety came from in the back half of his life, was that kitchens and kitchen culture, cooking culture just isn't the same as it was. And due to a number of other factors, we end up where we are today. But yeah, he really meant a lot to me, and I wanted to come out and say that because like I watch those shows, and we're not gonna be talking about them because they are struck work, but like Bourdain went to the Middle East and talked about it in a way that I never saw other cooks do. No other TV hosts would go to the Middle East and like talk about my family's culture and food and the people and the smells and the senses the way that Bourdain would, with a genuine reverence and interest in not only tasting and exploring their cuisine, but also like learning how to make it and learning why it's made and the sort of like conditions that make it. So that's my long-winded wind up for this discussion, I guess. I'm curious, Magellan, did you have any like big familiarity with Anthony Bourdain before reading Kitchen Confidential for this?
First of all, I mean, it's cool to hear your perspective on that, so I appreciated you sharing that and why this was your pickle. I don't think, I mean, I'm sure I've seen Anthony Bourdain on TV a couple times, because I've watched enough like restaurant and food related television and Food Network and, you know, random stuff and episodes of Hell's Kitchen and things like that somewhere, somehow I must have seen something, but I definitely knew who he was at the time that he passed away, but I didn't have like a deep personal connection. But in listening to this book, I listened to the audiobook version that he narrates, which I would recommend. And we
highly recommend for folks.
We can talk about that experience in a minute. But my connection to this was more on a personal level because my dad is a cook, and
right.
And it was a way to kind of like get some insight into my dad's experiences, like as a sous chef and as a line cook and as a dishwasher, and like all the different kind of roles and things that he's played in different contexts and different places in his life. And the like stories in the book felt very familiar to me because I could see how like the experiences that Anthony Bourdain lived through were at least like rhyming with the experiences that my dad has experienced. And he was like a similar age to my dad. He was born in the 50s, which is the same as my dad. So there's also kind of like a coming up and becoming a chef around the same time in the world. So not a connection to Anthony Bourdain per se, but rather to like what he represents in this book.
Mm-hmm. That's really great, because I forgot that your father is a chef, is still doing that.
He still works in kitchens and stuff, but I kind of want to talk about that when we talk about some of the themes that come up in the book, to be more explicit about that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. But it's a little hard, and I was telling John before the recording, like it's a little hard talking about Bourdain because his struggles with mental health and addiction like ring true with a lot of people that I know, and he meant a lot to me. And so when I heard that news in June of 2018, it was like a really big hit to my life. And so I'm just excited to be finally getting to talk about this book with someone else. It's like a thing that's been kind of personal for a while. But I want to get into it. So yeah, like I said, Kitchen Confidential, published in 2000. This was sort of his big break while working at a kitchen in New York. I was watching a clip of him at the time. There's a lot of good footage actually from the year 2000 when this book was published. And somebody asked him like, "Hey, so were you fired like immediately?" And he was like, "Actually, they were like fine with it at first because the boss there, like the manager of the restaurant, like didn't care. And then once he like actually read it, he like had a stern talking, and then eventually, yes, he did leave. And it is such a bummer if you read about all the restaurants that he references in this book, and you're like, I would love to go there. They're like all closed. Like there is not a single hint of any of the restaurants that Bourdain worked at in this book that are still open today. Which again, big reason why, you know, cooking culture has changed. It makes me sad, but the book is really entertaining. So like, if you haven't read or seen any of like Bourdain's writing before, he has this style of describing things that's very like sensual. He identifies early on in the book as a sensualist. He talks about like smells and sounds and words, and he loves doing accents. He's obsessed with culture and language in that like fun writer way. People often compared him to Hunter S. Thompson in that way. Which I think is accurate and leads into another point I'm going to make later. And, you know, especially early on, you learn about like what inspired his love of food. That beautiful story at the beginning of the book about trying cold soup for the first time and realizing it was cold, and then that was the point and it was really good, and how that like changed the way he thought about things is like such a classic beginning of books tale. Did you enjoy these early goings, like the whole reading Tintin and all that stuff?
Yeah, it was really charming, and also fun that he called it Tonton, and he's like doing the French pronunciation. But yeah, he manages to make essentially the story of like my seemingly well-off parents took me on a very expensive trip through France and we ate fancy food, and he makes that sound like this real rough and tumble, salt of the earth, like I'm a everyman kind of experience. And I was really charmed by it. I loved his description of eating the vichyssoise and being like, oh, I've never had a cold soup before. Like that's such a visceral image, and so telling that like the thing, because what ended up striking me about the book and the way that he talks about food, and we had some like listener comments or questions about this, which we'll directly address later. But the way that he talks about food is very process oriented. It's very much about like what goes into creating the final product as opposed to the product itself. And it's so telling that like this eye-opening food experience for him was not like I had a delicious soup. It was I had a soup that was prepared in a way that I didn't realize could be possible for soup. Like I'd never had a soup of this temperature before.
Right.
And that's such a chef nerd, food nerd thing to be like, oh my God, I've discovered my life's passion. You can make stuff in different ways. Wow.
Incredible.
Yeah. And then I also really love the anecdote that follows where his a lot of his kind of formative moments in the first couple chapters come from a deeply ingrained pettiness and a desire to like prove people wrong or screw people over or whatever. And it was really funny to me that he was mad that he'd been left in the car while his parents went to have a really fancy dinner. So he decided that he was going to become the real foodie and actually be the most adventurous eater in the family. And his triumph was having this like fresh clam right off the lake bed in front of everybody while they're all like, ew, gross. And those two anecdotes and dishes say so much, not about like Anthony Bourdain's palate, but like his spiritual relationship with the way in which food comes to be the way that it is, and like the position that food has within social interactions or cultural contexts. And I just think that both of those anecdotes say a heck of a lot about like the character that you're going to follow throughout the rest of the book.
Yeah, he's got that sort of, again, it can be simplified down to just saying he was like a rebel. He really liked the Ramones, for example. He was like a punk rock guy. You see old photos of him from the 80s and 90s, and he's got like long, greasy hair. Like that was always Bourdain, right? And what's fascinating is like when I remember reading about this book before he passed, he was a polarizing figure. One of my like good friends reviewed Kitchen Confidential like 10 plus years ago on Goodreads, and he was like, I love the book, but god damn it, is Bourdain so fucking full of himself. And I was like, like when people pass away, we tend to view their work differently, and it's just interesting seeing someone when he's alive being like, no, I don't actually like this is annoying. And so I totally, if somebody hears this Pickle and they're like, I gotta pick up Kitchen Confidential, and you hate it, I totally get that. He is a bit of a like asshole and a misanthrope, but it's charming. And he's, like I said, the blueprint for that. Like a lot of people have gone on to try and be that, and he really just was that sincerely, because from a young age he wanted to try things. And essentialism is something I've thought a lot about. I actually, in reading about it, remembered, do you remember in 2019, right after I got laid off, I read the Daily Stoic for a year, which is a book
I do remember that. Yeah,
I realized that was like literally the week after I got fired. I started reading that book, and which is hilarious. But that talks about sensualism and how like, oh, it's so important to like feel things as much as you can. And I have definitely like taken on those words and those ideas that he even talks about in this book of like, maybe it's weird, maybe it's dangerous for me, maybe it's unsafe, but like I'm going to do it because like that's the point of life, is you just sample things. And that bled into eventually his like television work, which is why I like so much of that stuff. But yeah, essentialism also has its problems too, right? Like he talks a lot actually, especially in the back half of the book, about his drug use. He had a heroin addiction for a long time. He would tell his like chef, his like cooking and people at his restaurant, like, go buy me cigarettes like during rush hour, and like talks a lot about like, he's very much a like, do the work, focus on doing the work, and like if I have to stay up for 25 hours to do it, then I don't care. And sometimes that would require the use of stimulants, so it's kind of hard to avoid thinking about or mentioning. I think, like I said, a lot of people also saw this early stuff of his in their family and friends. The first comment that we got actually was from listener Old as Your Omens, just talking about this kind of stuff we're talking about, which is Bourdain was such an odd reflection of my parents, says Omens, my family, and my life traveling with them as a kid, alcoholism included, that my entire family, but especially me and the other cousins, found a perverse sort of comfort in Bourdain. He was like if my dad or my uncle got famous while still a chef and got a TV show. His other shows on a massive scale were like a TV-fied version of her family's life, cooking, traveling, eating. But just the fun parts, right? Not the long nights at shitty jobs. That's what the book is for. And that's why the audiobook is great. It's a relaxing listen. She says he's deeply candid in a similar way to her uncles. And it concludes, I don't know if it's a generational thing or a cocaine thing, but that's what I like about him. And when he died, it felt like a very distant family member had passed. So, again, these are just like things we don't talk about, that Bourdain was like, yeah, I do it. I did a lot of coke. It's okay. It was New York in the 80s. Like, we had to do work, and that feels very vulnerable in a way you don't get, especially out of like, the TV chefs that he criticizes. He used to have a lot of beef. He actually calls out Emeril Lagasse in this book, and
yeah, he does,
which is hilarious. They later went on to reconcile after that. They like became friends, but he was not a fan of the like Andrew Zimmern Bizarre Foods type people, or like Emeril, Rachel Ray, Alton Brown. Like he just was so not into that, and that was just starting to blow up as he was, towards the middle of his career.
Yeah, it felt like food celebrities were more prominent maybe 10, 15 years ago than they are now.
Definitely.
So I could see him being frustrated by that wave of people. It's funny. He there's like a direct critique of Emeril, and there's also like a side thing of like before people were on TV saying "bam" and stuff like that.
Right.
So there's some cheeky stuff in there too.
Always cheeky. And his critiques and discussion of people doesn't just extend to other like television people. He talks about a lot of other chefs. So the middle of the book is a lot of different stories about the different restaurants that he worked at, the characters who he doesn't give. He gives all nicknames. So one of the big ones is Bigfoot, who was one of the people who trained him and taught him what being a head chef was like. He talks about Bigfoot being an honest man who was an asshole and would be weird and inappropriate, but also lovable and loyal to a fault. And people have like figured out who all of these people are at this point. It's not uncommon knowledge, you know? But I love that. I love that even though this is his real life, he manages to make it about characters, you know?
Yep.
And all the characters are like just people, you know? He never like glorifies or makes heroes out of the other people in his work or in his career. He's just like, oh, this guy, there's a part, I swear, like middle of the book, later in the book, where he says one of my best sous chefs that I ever worked with is the kind of guy that would call us while he was having sex with someone and be like, guys, you'll never guess what I'm doing. Like while we're working. It's like,
yikes.
It is a book I find myself blushing at also, especially early on. There's like a good amount of sex talk that's like wild. You know, talking about working even when he was washing dishes and being like, yeah, and then like the guy who worked on French fries would like bring girls to the back and you're like, the 80s, the 90s.
Yeah.
That brings me though, speaking of like vivid descriptions of certain things and feelings, to Arthur's question, which is fantastic here. He says, my question is, Bourdain talks about his first core experiences with food, the vichyssoise, which you mentioned earlier, the raw oyster on the boat. What are your core memories of food in early life and throughout your lives? Let's start with that one before we get to Arthur's other question. Core memories of food in your early life.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think for me, the earliest strong memory that I have of a dish that I ate and I was like, wow, this is like a special, cool, like there was something about it that was cool and special. Besides like the things that I liked as a kid and were sort of my comfort foods, you know, like mashed potatoes or whatever, those kinds of things, is I remember a time that my dad and I went fishing and we got some trout and we like got the trout and did all that stuff. And then my dad went and grilled it on the grill, like wrapped it up in foil and put some lemon on it. And it was delicious. And there was just something about that experience of like in waking up early in the morning to go out and fish. And then at the end of the day, like eating the thing that you had caught earlier and like understanding everything that went into that experience. Like in order for this meal to arrive in the form that it did, it essentially took an entire day's worth of various tasks and experiences in order to produce it. So I remember that being like a meal that stuck with me. So I think that's my earliest one, probably. Do you have an answer to that question?
I can't think of anything much earlier than the first time I went to Syria, which had some big moments for this. So that would have been when I was 11 years old. And I didn't know at the time, you never really do, but how much that my like brain chemistry was being rearranged. Like, because we got there to my family's house at like 4 a.m. And I've told this story before on various pods, but in front of like the door to the house was a like hanging dead lamb. And again, it's like so late and I'm so tired and I'm like, there's a dead lamb in front of me. Like the blood is dripping. This is nuts. And they're like clapping and cheering. My cousins and my uncles and aunts are like, this is so great. We're so happy you guys are here. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And then like I go clean up and I shower and they're like, it's time to eat. I'm like, eat what? And I start seeing them cooking and then just throwing that lamb on the grill with like seasonings. And it was probably the best red meat I've ever had in my life. And I was like, oh, like the way my dad cooks and grills is like it's a different ingredients like that he's using in the States, but it's this, like, this is what he was trying to emulate. And to go back to the source and be like you said, this is what it's like to see an animal be slaughtered in front of you and then to consume it was like huge. And it was so, I mean, like, I try to be an animal rights person, but I'm not, it's not one of my main beats, so to speak, but it's so good. It was so freaking good. And learning about different seasonings, and only recently I've gotten into cooking, but like, I'd say that was my earliest core food memory. Was trying lamb for the first time right off the bone, so to speak. Arthur has another question, which I think will get us into some cool territory here, though. The most common complaint across Bourdain's media is that he rarely describes the taste of the food that he eats. How important is it that, or not? How important is that, or not, to understand the point? At a certain point, is taste indescribable? Fantastic question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that question, I read that early in the process of listening to the book, and I think that helped me to have kind of a lens on how I was approaching this, because at the end of the day, like, I don't find engaging as a reader descriptions of how things taste, which is interesting. Like, I think descriptions of how things sound or smell or how they look or what they feel like is one thing, but for some reason, taste to me is like a very difficult thing to communicate without taste words, right? It's like trying to describe something's color without calling it red.
Right.
And so often I think the most evocative, like, taste descriptions are really more about other senses, like the temperature of the thing or the way that it feels or how it moves on your palate or like what it reminds you of or how it makes you feel or things like that. So just from like a prose standpoint, I didn't feel like I was missing descriptions of taste in this book. And then also, I think this is a book that's from the perspective of someone who's making food, not necessarily someone who's eating it, right? Like, what percentage, if you were to really think about it, what percentage of a chef's food do they actually eat, right? There's such a larger volume of food made that a chef is never going to taste. So the vast majority of their interactions with food, I mean, maybe they'll taste it to like for a quality control reason or something like that, but they're not like sitting down and relishing the meal necessarily. So much of the way that they engage with food is not about taste at all. It's about like intuition, it's about skill, it's about the processes that produce the food. It's about knowing, if I do these things and put in these inputs, I will attain this output that I have like an understanding of. I might not be able to viscerally taste what this, steak is going to taste like, but I know based on its color and its texture, its temperature, the seasonings that I put, I can control that taste experience without actually experiencing it myself. And so
exactly
that like attentiveness to process and fixation on process was like something I really enjoyed about the book. I loved when he talked about the importance of like dish towels and where people would stash their dish towels when a new linen, when the linens got washed, and the guy who would hide them in the ceiling tiles and things like that. Or like the importance of mise en place and how people would get frustrated if somebody fucks with their station and those kinds of things. Or when he's getting particular about like how to prepare your garlic and don't put the garlic through the crusher thing because and it's sort of like
disgusting. It ruins it.
right, and it's sort of like on a certain level, how much does it actually ruin it? Like, it's still gonna taste like garlic. There's subtleties there, but at a certain point, it maybe isn't even about taste. It's more about kind of the principle of the way in which you produce certain tastes. So, yeah, for a book where like flavor is conspicuously absent, it wasn't missed, at least for me.
I felt like I still had it. I feel like I still had descriptions of the food without getting it, because ultimately flavor and like describing food, it's a subjective process. Like we invent adjectives. I always think of the word unctuous as a modern word that people use it's like chewy, right? And people use it to describe food. And it's like, I understand what you mean when you tell me that a food is unctuous, but it's actually not that useful for me to hear that. I'd rather hear about like, yeah, I prepared it in a way that it was like it got a little soft because there was too much smoke in the kitchen, blah, blah, blah. Like, the preparation of the food matters as much as the adjectives you use to describe it. And this book is 100% about how you prepare food. I could invent a scenario for you instead of referencing TV and film, because we really can't, of somebody like, I could describe to you what pasta tastes like and you're like, yeah, that seems pretty good. Or I could tell you that I made it for the love of my life in the middle of Sicily, with like real ingredients, and I pulled them from here and I used a knife that was handed down for generations, and I made pasta from the love of my life. And you're like, that's beautiful. And it's like, it's the same food, but it's the context that matters. So I think Kitchen Confidential fully understands that, like, understanding the condition for you, the reader, to understand the conditions that lead to your food being made helps you appreciate your food more. And that's like the main takeaway, I think, from this. Not that I'm wrapping up, but like one of the main takeaways from the book is like, yeah, we put ourselves through hell so that food tastes good. It doesn't just taste good because of magic and salt. It's a lot of grinding your heart and soul against a kitchen for hours and hours and hours and hours until you fail a little less. And I think that's really beautiful, and it's interesting. So you mentioned that you didn't read the whole book, correct? You don't remember where you left off?
Yeah, I listened to the parts that were like his coming of age, essentially going to the Culinary Institute, kind of proving his mettle in the Provincetown restaurants that he would work at over the summers, and then some of his early experiences being a chef in New York City, and then kind of bouncing around between different places. And then I just got to like a big break that he had that's turning sour now.
Yes.
So I think I'm like 3/5 of the way through or something like that.
I love the part that you're on, because you start to learn that Bourdain was like kind of a good manager, but also kind of like he liked firing people. That was like one of the privileges he wanted to have as a head chef, was like, I should be able to fire people when they're bad, which is like fair. But to say like I'm leaving because you're not letting me fire people is like an interesting.
Well,
like,
there's
quirk.
There's a part where he leaves, like those early chef jobs, he leaves because he was being made to fire too many people.
Right. He wants to have choice over it. He wants to like be able to craft the perfect kitchen. He talks later about like poaching from all the different restaurants he worked at to make new restaurants, and how he jumped between a lot like that, by being like, oh, there was a Dominican guy there who was really good with bread, and I poached him. And then there was like a, Mexican guy who I did this, and he was great with a knife. And that's how I made my latest kitchen, which I think is awesome, because it's like, it's about control. Like, part of it is being a control freak and being like, we know how to do this. Things inside of the realm of the kitchen work a certain way. And when you break that, you fuck everything up. And the outside world is always fucked up, which again leads a man into some pretty dark parts of his life. He talks about that at the end of the book as well. But I love the very tail of the book. It has 2 chapters that I love. One is advice for future chefs, because he knows that like writing about this in such a romantic and cool and exciting way might make some people want to be a chef. And he's like, hey, this is a wild job. It's like the most misogynist job you're ever going to work. It's the most exhausting, body destroying job you're ever going to work. And I love it. And here's those are things you should be aware of before even attempting it. Don't go into it with an ego. Don't go into it being sensitive, you know, that very like early aughts way of like, it's a man's world, I don't know what to tell you. Like, but he comes at it from a place of like, he's like, I know it's bad that we're misogynist and we talk about our dicks a lot in the kitchen. Like, I'm aware that that's bad, but that is how it works. And if you hate that, like, yeah, you can make change happen, but don't work in a kitchen. You know, like he's just real. He's just honest in that way that I really appreciate, even though it's kind of disheartening to hear, like, if you're not okay with the way that kitchens can be really gross, misogynist kind of cesspools, then like don't be a chef. He's like super honest about all that stuff. And then the very last chapter is he talks about his first time going to Japan as part of a show that he was filming, or as part of, it was originally going to be a book and they decided they turned it into a TV show. This is before any of the ones that were his big break. And just describing because he had never, in all of the course of this book, had never really traveled. You know, he went to France with his parents and that time, and like went with them when he was a kid. But once he was an adult, he kind of like stuck around New York for a long time. And so when he went to Japan for the first time, he was like, whoa, food is, whoa, this is amazing. They like make food differently. They got this figured out in ways that we never even thought of. Like, what are we doing? And you get to hear about his mind opening up wide. And then he's like, you know, if you want to be a chef and it leads to things like this, then that's awesome, because life is about experiencing new things. And that's kind of the note the book ends on.
That's cool.
It's super cool. I recommend finishing up the book if you have time.
Yeah, I definitely will. I'm engaged with it.
The tale of it is super good. I also, for what it's worth, I think I said this earlier, but I read the first third of it, and then I audiobooked the back 2/3. So I didn't get to hear him pronounce "don don." Some other topics in my research, I also found out that Bourdain was just like a really big knife guy. Did you know he talks early in the book about how he would walk around high school with like a samurai sword and nunchucks or whatever?
Yeah.
College?
Oh my god. I was like, yep, got it.
It's so funny. It's so funny that he grows up to be obsessed with chef's knives. There's like a part in the book somewhere where he talks about like, here's the equipment that you actually need to take care of if you're going to be a chef. And he's like, get one good knife. Don't buy 17 knives. Get one really good knife and you'll be good forever. Get, you know, like X blender or whatever, X tools, get a good cast iron, and you can do all of the shit at home. You know, it's not an expensive thing. Like we were talking about last week, it's not an expensive hobby to get into if you want to do it as a hobby. Yeah. But doing it as a job requires you to kind of like give a part of yourself away.
Yeah.
I talked about the rockstar reputation. I talked about Japan. I also just loved, hearing about the different kitchens in New York City and like what it was like in the 90s, like in the 2000s. I thought that was all so interesting. Different egos clashing with each other, and how, I think he says this somewhere, like, it's actually a really small network of people. Like, if you fuck up somewhere by stealing, he's like talking about honesty and like, oh, you call out of work sick because like you were having sex with some girl the night before and like she didn't leave on time, then like if you're honest about that, your boss will understand. But if you steal and lie to your boss, then you will never work in this town again. Which is like so interesting, right? It's pirates. They talk about this in other research that I looked up, but you know, he read all these adventuring books as a kid, and then he took a job that is as close to being a swashbuckling pirate today as you can really get.
Yeah, he has a great line at the beginning of the book where he talks about attaining the child's dream of running one's own pirate crew, which is such a fun way to describe a kitchen.
It's all about camaraderie, and there's a lot of violence, and there's different languages being screamed, and it's nonstop, and it's exhausting, but it's beautiful what it produces.
Yeah.
Like the romantic ideal of being a pirate. I think those were my big notes. What were some other things that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I think kind of on that note, I think that was a lot of the charm that this book held for me, is hearing about the sort of rogues gallery of like, you know, I worked this one job where everybody lived in a halfway house, and they all had these were all their different tattoos, and this other job where like there was this guy who was I was the understudy for at the meat station or whatever, and I burned myself, and he was like, look at my hand, it's all, you want a bandage, like, here, I'm gonna touch this hot pan. Like, that stuff is really fun. I think, you know, you can't avoid the fact that there's also just like a pervading toxicity to that is like the book pays lip service to, but doesn't really want to criticize, because like that is the fantasy of the thing, right? And that is like the place that Anthony Bourdain found a home for so long, was within that kind of like toxic masculine environment. And I think on the one hand, I was really charmed by it because like I like adventure stories, I like pirates, I like we're a crew on a mission and we're gonna accomplish this thing, but also it bummed me out from the perspective of like my dad going through those sorts of experiences and seeing him live within the volatility of the restaurant business, and like having a job in one place for a while and feeling like he's doing great work, and then that place goes out of business and now he's got to find somewhere else to work. Seeing him have those sort of like dreamer ideas that Bourdain talks about like the people who dream of starting their own restaurant, and like what the menu would be and how they would set it up. And, every other week you've got an idea about like, oh, so-and-so had an idea about such and such, and I think I'm going to do that with them. And like, there's a lot about this that's kind of like, I think, difficult to swallow to a certain extent, because it's sad to think that in order to like do this thing that has so much love in it, like prepare food for people, which requires, in order to do it well, I think requires such a devotion and love of craft. But in order to do that, like in the world that we live in, the contexts where you can do that are mired in like a work culture that just denies your humanity to a certain extent. And like, that's
100%.
a really tough thing. So that was something that, it didn't sour my enjoyment of the book, but it's, I think, a fact of what's discussed in the book.
Right. And again, that's like kind of similar to what we talked about last week. Like, what's the work that you're willing to put your time and energy into? How do you spend your free time? Because like, I'm sorry, but from this book and from every other like cook chef that I've ever read about or heard about, you just don't get to have a life. You have to accept that your life is in that kitchen. He was, Bourdain was married multiple times. And most of them had to accept that I'm just not going to see you much. You're going to come home when I'm asleep, and you're going to wake up when I'm asleep. And that's going to be our relationship. And I might see you one day a week. And we romanticize people like that as like badasses and cool guys, but it's profoundly sad. And again, it sucks that we're in a strike right now, because there's so much good television and film that covers this. If you want more like additional reading, so to speak, and I'm free to talk about that off pod with people if you're curious. But yeah, it is just but like, that's why it's so interesting that at the end he's like, hey, did this make you want to become a chef? Question 1, why did I do that? I didn't plan that. What do you mean? What did it make you want to do? Because you mentioned teaching actually in your notes.
I think it was really interesting to hear him describe the experiences and the themes and the sort of driving I don't know, like just the animating, like I don't even know what it is, an urge, I guess, or a calling or something of being a chef, because a lot of what he described to me was like, oh, that is what it feels like to be a teacher, kind of. Because I think like the similarities that I saw were, teaching, a lot like how he's describing kitchens, is a place where people who need structure in life can find it. Like, he talks about the kitchen as almost a militaristic environment that kind of provides boundaries and and structure for people who may not have that otherwise. And I think that that's probably true of a lot of teachers. I think there's also this really fun and interesting idea that like there are some wacky characters here who kind of earn their eccentricity by being really competent, and like the more capable you are at your thing, the more that you're allowed to just be weird, which is definitely a teacher thing. I think some of the strangest people that I've met are people who are educators, and it's just that they're good enough educators that they can kind of be who they are. There's also like that same toxicity I was describing around taking care of yourself and taking a day, like the way that he was talking about, well, if you have the sniffles, you come in, you don't want to let the people down around you, and that's what education feels like. And also this like obsession with having moves, the way that he talks about like the people at the one restaurant who would always kind of like slam the oven door shut with their hip or whatever, or like put a little flourish into their chops and just do kind of extra cool little things that, you know, they don't really need to do, but it's a demonstration of like, I've done this so many times and I have such an acute knowledge of like the moves that I'm executing that I can put a little English on it. And like teachers do that for sure. Like I remember I saw a teacher one time who was showing math answers on an overhead projector or whatever, and or like a document camera, and he'd frozen the image on the question with no answer next to it, and then he did this thing where he faked a sneeze and unfroze the image to show the answer at the same time. And it's like, you didn't need to do that. You didn't need to pull that move, but like you've got that little move that you can do. Yeah, and then that same feeling of like, this is a small world, like everybody knows everybody, everybody's trying to poach everybody. And then I think the thing that's different is like, you know, I don't think that my colleagues are like doing coke in the back room or like fucking back there or whatever. I think they're doing that stuff on their free time, maybe, or maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, that is like obviously the big difference, is some of the more salacious things that he's describing.
I'm sure there are some teachers somewhere who are doing that.
Right. But it's not like, I guess the difference is that if that is happening and you become aware of it, it's not like a part of the piratey texture of what makes the job cool. It's like, oh, that's fucked up, right? That's sort of the, I think, principal difference. But otherwise, a lot of the feeling of like, we are in this, we're in the mission, like we are shoulder to shoulder. You got to do your part, I got to do my part, and we're going to be real strange while we do it. Like that feels like teaching to me, 100%.
Beautiful. And just like doing the grind. The closest thing I have is when the 3 years that I worked at the pharmacy.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I was wondering if you felt that way.
I worked at a very busy pharmacy, for those who don't know, and like one of the busiest in the state. And definitely when it was peak time, I felt like I like came out of my body a little bit. And like he talks in this book about like having dreams about it, and like how he was so difficult as a partner because he would be thinking about the next day's menu while like eating his own dinner like with his wife. And I would have dreams like that where I was like, oh, I could have optimized this, I could have done this. And it's beautiful, and I want to be able to do work like that in an equitable and well-paying way, where I can like go into it and then come out of it. And that's why I would never make a good chef, is because I want to separate my work from my life, and I just can't. But I like know people who've had like a bad couple of years, and then they don't want to go back to school, and then they're like, I think I'm going to try cooking. I'm going to just try getting into like restaurant work. I'm going to practice. Because like he went to CIA, Culinary Institute of America, but like you don't have to go to culinary school to learn this stuff. The internet's awesome.
Yeah.
So really, if you're in a weird part of your life and you're like, I think I'm ready to commit to this, like it's still there. It's just very different, especially since COVID. There's a lot less of the like tight quarters work like this. The culture of it has changed. The like rampant drug use has changed. It's just really, from what I've heard, like so different. And that's why a lot of people in Bourdain's generation like got out and got into other fields. but I think there's still a reverence from that. Like I Binging with Babish often talks about how he's a cook, not a chef, because he's never been as good as any of these people, and he's never worked in a kitchen like that before. And he idolizes it. He idolizes people like Bourdain because he's like, it's so amazing what you guys were able to do, and I just make funny videos for YouTube. Like that's what a lot of this culture is now. But shout outs to all the chefs out there, including your dad. I think it's wild work, and I really envy the being able to fully invest yourself in it part. Not the outside of work, but like being able to just spend those 8 hours like grinding, committing is like kind of sick, actually.
Yeah.
Because like, what do? I pay invoices and I send emails, and I fart around for like 6 hours. Like, it just, I read this book and I'm like, what am I? What is my job accomplishing? You know, I'm not even making something.
Yeah, it's funny listening to the book because it's like when he's describing all of the, you know, the cool stuff, like went for summer Provincetown and like did all these drugs and had the sex and cooked the food, and you're like, yeah, whoa, that's so cool. And he's like, yeah, and then I spent like a couple decades just like fucking depressed and in really precarious situations, and you're like, whatever, that's fine. I want your life. He's like, are you sure?
So I spent the whole chapter at the end of the book being like, hey, is your brain broken like mine? Because
yeah, because there was a lot of time there where it was rough. It was not a fun time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
rest in peace to Anthony Bourdain. That's the other thing I want to just reiterate. He's such a fucking cool, great guy. He set the blueprint. I love this book. I think it's beautiful. I think it's really well written and entertaining and engaging. And he wrote a second book as a follow-up that I've heard is like really depressing, because this book kind of stops talking about his life right around when the TV stuff begins to happen. And when he talks about that, that's where he's like, oh, I loved traveling the world. I love doing that. But I realized I didn't have the outlet that I needed anymore. And you give somebody this outlet for like seminal parts of their lives, their 20s, 30s, 40s, and then you take them out of it. That hole needs to be filled. And so that's where I think, again, not to like make assumptions, but that's where, from my understanding, a lot of his despair came from in later life, was like, how do you get out of a career like this?
Yeah.
And he had a child and had a wife and stuff, but it's like, people like to think like, oh, once you have a wife and kids, like that becomes your life. And it's like, yeah, but that's not something you can spend 24 hours a day on. You know, it's not the same way.
Well, and I think, and I've seen a similar thing with my dad where like, you know, he's in his 60s now and he's had some health stuff and been kind of like fucked over a little bit because of that by his job. And it's like this thing that I could do where I could like be on the line, you know, for 8 hours straight or whatever. Suddenly I can't physically function doing that anymore. And like, what does it feel like to not have that? Like, I can still cook, I can still do this and that, I can run a station, I could be the pastry guy over here, I could wash dishes if that's the thing that needs to be done. Like, I can still be a part of the thing, but I can't like go into battle in the same way. So I can definitely understand how when you spend such a long time like kind of wrapping up your identity and defining it around those high intensity moments, like that's who I am. I feel the most who I am when those things are happening. To not be able to access that at the same volume or in the same way must be a pretty difficult thing to do. Like when, I don't know how much longer I'll be a teacher, to be honest with you, but if I was like a lifer teacher and then I get to an age where it's like, I can't really do this anymore, I think that would be kind of a troubling situation. And I don't know that I know what to do with that.
Well, and it's not to say that losing or leaving the career that you invested so much time and energy into is guaranteed to like make you really depressed. It's just that you had something and now you don't have that something. And in Anthony Bourdain's case, he filled it with like the fame that he always promised he never wanted. You know, he was always an awkward dude outside of the kitchen. He never wanted to be a celebrity, and he just ended up being that. He like had a Hollywood girlfriend. He got wrapped up in a bunch of controversies, and he he was like he had trouble being a father. And it's like that is from my reading the stuff that led to him taking his own life, unfortunately, which is like, yeah, when you again have the hole in your life that you fill with things that aren't fulfilling and aren't healthy. Like nobody does this and then becomes a celebrity. That's a really rough career path.
Right.
So I think like in someone to other people who like come out of their career, like that's why we try to change our careers as much as we can while we're still young, so that you don't just say like, oh, from the ages of 8 to 45, I did this one thing and now I don't do it. Because that's why a lot of people like when they retire struggle to find meaning. Your work should not be attached. That your work should not define your personhood. And Bourdain even talks about that stuff. You know, we were posting clips in the Discord from some of his shows where it's like the dude was clearly an anti-capitalist. The dude clearly understood the idea of like profiting off of repressed underclasses. He worked with those underclasses, those lower class people, and it sucks, you know, living on your work. That's kind of where I land on it, I think.
Yeah.
Ugh, heavy stuff, man. Heavy stuff. Is there any other big points you want to touch on before we take it home?
There was a line that really tickled me, where he was talking about his like younger years, and he said, "My on-again, off-again girlfriend spun pizza for a living." I just love that.
Fucking beautiful.
I love that. And the other one that tickled me was when he's talking about working in the restaurant where it's like basically run by the mob. And he's talking about like how much more efficient things were and how much more willing like food suppliers were to supply him if he called the right one. Sometimes he'd call ones associated with the wrong family or whatever. But he had this line where he says, "I had a lot of meetings in cars." And he describes the one where the guy's talking to him in the car about bread and then goes around to the trunk to like open the trunk and show him some bread. Like, that's just how these guys know how to do business. It's so funny.
It just translates weirdly to other careers. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. But anyway, those are my favorite lines, I think.
Since we talked about Hunter S. Thompson, I wanted to conclude with a poem. Well, again, heads up, we're talking about self-harm here, guys. I just need to say that one more time. Hunter S. Thompson also committed suicide, and his suicide note is a poem that I really love and that I think applies to Bourdain's story a little bit. Do you feel comfortable with me reading that on the pod?
Yeah, please do.
So it's really beautiful. It's called "Football Season Is Over," and this was again Hunter S. Thompson's final note that he wrote before taking his life. No more games, no more bombs, no more walking, no more fun, no more swimming. 67. That is 17 years past 50. 17 more than I needed or wanted. Boring. I'm always bitchy. No fun for anybody. 67. You are getting greedy. Act your old age. Relax. This won't hurt. And it's like, you know, like you just get to a certain age and you realize that you are not the person you used to be and that the world has probably moved on past you, and that happens at a different age for everybody. So yeah, just wanted to share that and how I thought about that a lot with this. But let's move on. Yeah, let's attempt to segue out of an episode, I would say, of Chatz that's a little tonally all over the place, and let's talk about let's bring it back. Let's recenter. You know, this is still a fun book. It's not it's depressing when you know where Bourdain's life went.
The rest of the context, sure.
Yeah, when you know the rest of the context, but in isolation, Kitchen Confidential is a thrilling read. It's so breezy. It's a great audiobook, and the guy ruled. You know, Bourdain was a really great person. Say what you will about him. Magellan, I need to hand you something. It's my pickle. You now have the sacred pickle, and it's your pickle next week.
Thank you.
What's inside of the
So let me think here. So a couple things are inspiring me here. One of them is just playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3. One of them is on the picket line maybe a week ago or so. Various like D&D actual play folks, like the folks from Critical Role and Dimension 20, went to the WGA SAG picket line to do like Brennan Lee Mulligan DM'd a like 100-person D&D experience on the picket line, basically.
Whoa, cool.
Which is cool. So for our next episode, I haven't decided what specifically, but I'd love to just do like an RPG session where I GM you in something for like an hour.
Sounds kinky.
But
in a good way.
yeah.
Respectful.
I don't know yet, like genre or system. I got to think about that. If folks have suggestions or if you have preferences, let me know. But yeah, I figured that's like a medium we haven't covered yet in our pickles. So yeah, some kind of tabletop RPG experience where I'm the GM and Alan's the player is what we'll do next time.
I'm excited. Chatz is tackling the actual play. Let's freaking go, gamers. Yeah. This is the best thing about Chatz at a Pickle, is getting to just do stuff that I never would have thought we would do a few months ago. So hell yes is what I say to that. Can you take it to the plug sound, Meg?
Sure. So thank you, of course, as always, for listening to Chatz, a television podcast, or Chatz, a podcast right now, Chatz in a Pickle. We really appreciate it. There are a couple of ways that you can get in touch with the show. You can email us at chatspod@gmail.com with any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, recommendations, pickles, other nouns that might end up in the email inbox. You can also get in touch with us by following us and DMing us on X. We're at Chatspod on X.
Just call it Twitter, dude. No one's calling it X.
Twitter on twitter.com/Twitter/Chatspod. We are Chatz Television Podcast on YouTube, where you can find these episodes and also archives of streams that we've done in the past that we'll do in the future. Those things are on YouTube. We also have archived streams on our Twitch. We are Chatspod on Twitch. And we, stream every once in a while, so you can check us out there. You can support the show in a couple of ways. You could give us a rating where you listen to the show, or, on those YouTube videos, you could like them, you could comment on them, those kinds of things. You can share the show with a friend. You can also support us with money on Patreon at patreon.com/chatspod. $1 a month and up gets you feeling good and also gets you on the Discord. $3 a month and up gets you twice monthly bonus content and access to a very large backlog of bonus episodes, and $5 a month and up gets you thanked right here at the end of the episode. Okay, here we go. Our $5 a month patrons include Arthur, Emrys, Jen, Justin, Kat, Lee, my mom, Marcus, May Louise, Michael, Noel, Nick, and Pat of the Brothers in Infinite War, Six, and Stefan. Thank you, folks, for supporting the show. We really appreciate it. You can also support other folks with your money, such as the Entertainment Fund, which we would recommend you do before you support us. You can support our good friend at Camillustrator, who created our podcast art, on the socials. And you can also check out some things that we're going to recommend to you. Oh my gosh, I forgot about our other podcasts. You can listen to our other podcasts. You can listen to Alan on the Creature Quorum and Talking Marketing, and me on Smash Echoes, Super Smash Echoes. Yeah. We have other podcasts. And I have a newsletter, which is called Not That Magellan on Substack. Okay. Yeah. Chatsam. Alan, do you have one? Can you give it to us?
I was going to say, earlier I was like, oh, there's no restaurants from this book that are still open. The lobster, what is it called? The Lobster Shack? The one that he did.
The lobster shit.
No, the one that he washed dishes at the beginning of the book when he first started. That's in P-Town.
Yeah, I don't remember the name, but I know what you're talking about.
The Lobster Pot. That's still open. Do you want to drive 2 hours with me across the little bend of Massachusetts and go to the Lobster Pot and see if it's good?
Kind of. Yeah, actually, yes.
You might actually be able to take a boat from downtown. I'm seeing lines that you could like take a boat. So I don't want to drive around because it's literally at the tip of the. Think about Massachusetts. You have to go down and around the little tip. I always do. Oh, and to get to P-Town, but if you could just take a boat from downtown, it would be way easier. So we'll go to I don't know. I've never been. Isn't that like that's like a cool city people hang out in? A big queer population. I think that's not my Chatham. Oh. My Chatham is a video gaming experience that I had last week that I'm going to continue having for the next couple weeks. So I have my friends in the Scanline Media community. Earlier this year, I played through Resident Evil 5 with friend of the podcast, Harry, who was on the American Born Chinese episode, which will come back when we can talk about TV again, guys. And we liked Resident Evil 5. It's a messy game. It's from 2009. It's janky. It's really racist. But it's fun. I don't know. And Harry said he doesn't want to play Resident Evil 6. And I was like, but I need to. It sounds like the weirdest fucked up B-movie game I've ever seen. And I got another friend, Garnet Wager co-host Nick, who I'm going to be seeing in the next couple of weeks, to start a Resident Evil 6 co-op campaign with me. And we started it a couple nights ago. And that game is bananas. Alan, I don't want to play the 6th game in a franchise first. Dog, it's fine. It won't make sense to you if you've played all the games. So just have fun with it. It's a zombie shooter, but it's mostly an action game. It's so funny and weird and busted. It's from 2012. The co-op works totally fine, and I love it. And I need to chat some that experience of playing Resident Evil 6 co-op with a friend and maybe stream it to your Discord friends like a B-movie, because that's just, we're all having fun together. It's a community of friendship. That's my chatsum. What is your chatsum, good sir? Is it the Kitchen Confidential TV show, which is a 13 Under 13? Starring Bradley Cooper. Starring Bradley Cooper as Anthony Bourdain. Starring starring Nicholas Brendan.
Wow.
Oh my God! Wow, no, we'll talk. John Francis Daly. There's so many Chatz people in this. We'll talk.
Please write that down somewhere. We'll talk.
I did.
It's so hard to think of anything I've done besides
it's not
play
Baldur's Gate 3.
It's
like Chatsum
impossible. I don't think we've Chatsumed Baldur's Gate 3.
Is that illegal? We did a whole episode on it.
Can I Chatsum it though, please?
I'm gonna call you a sneaky man, but yeah, you can do it. Go ahead.
Have you
what are you liking about it?
Have you Chatsumed Remap before? You probably have, right?
I think so. Are you listening to Remap?
I am now, because they're talking about Baldur's Gate 3 and Starfield.
Yum.
Which I haven't played. I downloaded Starfield, but I haven't played it.
Oh, Game Pass. I was like, you bought Starfield?
Game Pass. So I can't Chatsum it because I haven't played it. But yeah, I'm just gonna chat some Baldur's Gate 3. I've also listened to coverage on the Besties and Remap Radio. Those are great video game podcasts if you want to hear people talk about video games. Okay, I'll do this. No, never mind. Yeah,
I haven't chatted with Remap Radio.
Okay, so great.
I'm gonna steal the Remap Radio. Go ahead.
I'm gonna steal a real life recommendation from Alan and make it my chatsum, which is Remap Radio, which is the revival, the new iteration of a podcast from the folks who originally did what was it called? The other thing.
I'm not gonna tell you. I want you to figure it out. Waypoint Radio.
Waypoint. Thank you. Waypoint Radio. And it's great. They talk about some video games I haven't heard of before, and sometimes I don't listen super closely to those parts, but it sounds like they're saying smart things. And when they talk about a game that I'm interested in or that I have heard of, they really do say very smart things, and I like it. And they had some good Starfield coverage and some good Baldur's Gate coverage, so check it out.
Definitely. I'm excited to hear you talk about Starfield eventually. It didn't register in my mind that that's a game that you could play.
Oh, I can.
But you'd have to put Baldur's Gate down to do it, which
impossible to put Baldur's Gate down. I'm like excitedly replaying parts of the beginning of Baldur's Gate. I can't think of any time that I've ever done that with an RPG. Like, oh my god, that 10 hours was so fun. I want to do it again with a slightly different character. It's a new experience for me. So anyway, that was my very long non-chatsum that turned into a chatsum.
You got there. That's what matters.
Yeah.
Is that it? Did Chatz just become the News Riz King?
Yeah.
I think we're done.
Yeah, we got to go to LSU real quick.
Herd chef.
All
that. Herd chef. Behind.
There
is a part where Bourdain goes down all the terminology, which is fun.
Oh, okay. I got to keep listening so I can use those.
Yeah, he's like, here's all the words that people use and what they mean. Thank you for being the cooking knife to my Anthony Bourdain, because I can't live without you. And thank you guys so much for listening to Chatz and a Pickle. Bye.